Hey Jordan,
Hey, what's going on?
have you ever read The Charge of the Light Brigade? It's this super mighty and kind of intense poem written by Alfred Lord Tennyson.
I've never heard of Charge of the Light Brigade in my life. It sounds interesting, though. What about it?
Now, well, Tennyson wrote this poem about military charge during the Crimean War. The Light Brigade charged into almost certain death, and yet there's this bravery and nobility in their actions. Although hundreds died in enemy fire, the main part is the incredible tale with the amount of honor and sacrifice it took to ride into battle.
Charging to almost certain death. I can see the honor and sacrifice part, but why charge into certain death?
Uh, well, Jordan, that's kind of the thing. It's not really about certain death. It's about standing up for what you believe in, and no matter the odds. It's about the noble action of the human spirit, if anything.
Wire.
It's copper. Anyway, Jordan, I think you'd like this poem if you read it. There's some intense words used throughout the stanzas to create a strong story throughout the poem. For example, at the end of each stanza, Tennyson writes, "Rode the 600, rode the 600 into the jaws of death. Not the 600, left the 600, noble 600."
So, so what I'm hearing is that it sounds like the author wants us to remember the 600 and all they've sacrificed. That's pretty intense. That's a lot.
Yeah, Jordan, that's absolutely correct. Each stanza ends with a powerful line, kind of creating this cumulative effect. It's like a poetic acknowledgement for their unwavering commitment to battle.
Cool. Cool. But why did they charge in the first place? What did they? What's the reason? Why did they fight?
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because Tennyson mentions that too. He writes, "There's not to reason why, but there's to do and die." And I've kind of always liked this part of the poem. It definitely demonstrates a hard military discipline that the British soldiers had back then.
Well, you should have started off with that.
Well, now you know.
Well, okay, but I feel like you did a pretty good job describing this poem. You know your poetry. So the poem by Tennyson is about the British cavalry, specifically the Light Brigade,
Right?
and the heroic but ultimately tragic charge during the Battle of the Crimean War.
Hmm.
The poem pays tribute to the bravery and the sacrifice of the soldiers involved in this military action. It really does a good job of showing what they've done.
Sure, yeah. It sounds like you have a pretty good understanding, Jordan. Um, and Tennyson does a great job at showing the realities of military conflict. Really captures a lot of elements of the tragic outcome, such as death, obedience to orders, sacrifice, bravery, and more.
Well, I'll give you one thing. You were right about how intense this poem is. It's unbelievable. But how does it end? What is the conclusion of all this?
Yeah, so the poem ends by reflecting on the aftermath of the war and the soldiers. So the last line says, "Honor the Light Brigade, Noble 600." Uh, this was definitely one of Tennyson's main goals, was to have the brave men remembered for their bravery and their honor and that sacrifice they made for the people they care about.
So he wants us to remember the honor and their memory.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Although there
Okay.
were tragic outcomes, Tennyson wants to ensure that the men were remembered. And he does this throughout the poem by repeatedly saying, "Honor the Light Brigade."
Well, I can see how this poem draws themes to the duty and the sacrifice that the military faces today. And although this poem was made a long time ago, war is war, and this poem shows that during this modern time they were on the same axis.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of how this poem resonates to times today.
Well, it sounds like an interesting poem. I'm gonna have to check it out. Does Tennyson use, metaphors in this poem to emphasize anything in the poem?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. Tennyson mentions words like "into the jaws of death." That kind of brings light to the severity of the war and the almost certain death the
Right.
men had to face. So that'd be a good example of a metaphor.
Ah, okay. Well, that makes sense now. I fully grasp the situation the soldiers were in, and it sounds like some really tough times.
I mean, yeah, I mean it definitely was, and I mean I hope you learned something new and just try checking out the poem.
Okay, yeah, I'll definitely check it out. And I learned something new.